Hello, welcome to episode 39 of the NOTCAST. Today is, I think, the 3rd of January 2021. We're in a new year. Technically speaking, it's a new decade because decades roll over officially at the end of the year ending in the zero. But that's not quite how everyone else thinks about it. We are now in the Roaring Twenties officially of the 21st century. So 2020, done, dusted, gone. And I'm very happy to have seen the back of that particularly unpleasant year that I don't think anybody is really a particular fan of. Today I'm going to talk about what is appropriately a new album, or more correctly an old album. I'm going to talk about U2's best of 1980 to 1990, which ties in very neatly with the end of the decade blues. So this album is I'm leaping out of chronology here, because although this album says it's the best of 1980 to 1990, it was released in 1998. And without wishing to spoil a future episode where I talk about it, I always classify this album in my U2 chronology as beginning or belonging in the gap between Rattle and Hum and the Achtung Baby album, which is here. I may end up starting to bleed into talking about Achtung Baby during this episode, and Achtung Baby is definitely worth a full episode on its own, so I may at some point stop, do a costume change, much like Clark Kent, classic, and see where we go. So, although it was released in 1998, the best of 1980-1990 covers exactly that, 1980 to 1990. And there's a story behind the release of this album, and do correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, the band were renegotiating their contract with Island Records following the release of the Europa album in 1993, and Island were very aware that the band hadn't yet released a greatest hits or best of compilation album, and that was something which the band were keeping in their back pocket. Part of those negotiations, either in 1993 or 1994, around about the upcoming pop album, or part of those negotiations after the pop album, were for U2 to agree to release 3 best of compilations, which they've neatly divided into covering the 2 decades of the band's existence, plus a third compilation, which is the only career spanning compilation that they have. So this one very clearly aimed at fans of the band between 1980 and 1990. You'll have noticed I just did a quick stutter there, the change being that I had to go and look something up and get a prop from another room because I'd forgotten to do it. These shows are nothing if not slick and well-rehearsed stadium experiences, which of course is what U2 were becoming. So the best of, as I understood it, part of the deal that the band renegotiated was for the release of compilations, and they'd always resisted releasing a compilation previously, primarily because it felt a little bit like wrapping up the band, or maybe putting a full stop on it. Lots of bands, after they release their first best of, kind of are on a bit of a commercial decline. Prominent example of that is Erasure. When they released the pop album in 1992, their commercial profile and their sales profile dipped fairly dramatically after the release of Pop, the Total Pop compilation in 1992. Depeche Mode also did a singles album 86 to 98. After that, their sales tailed off a little bit, which also ties in with the band being in existence for around about 20 years. And basically, if you're not careful, a greatest hits album can look like a desperate kiss of death, an attempt to remind people who you used to be, and also as an attempt to garner a bit of extra money without actually putting any extra work in. Now, for this album, there was an element of that in terms of perception, but thankfully not very much, and this album has aged very well, and U2, unlike a great many other bands, managed to have a commercial profile and creative profile that stayed quite strong throughout their career. Unlike certain other bands, they aren't seen as being tied to the particular decade in which they started, but more as a band that spans all of the decades. And as I said in a previous episode, one of the things that I find really, really important and enjoyable about bands is that they don't become nostalgia acts, is that they continue to write and record and perform and release new material, because there is never going to be a time when that band are 65 again, or 70 or whatever. I'm really interested in knowing, well, how are they making sense of the world, being old people in a young man's game. That's why if I had a choice between old stuff or new stuff, every time I'll go for new stuff. If I had a choice between a greatest hits and a new studio album, I'll go for the new studio album. Even if the new studio album is tosh and crap, I would prefer having the option of liking those songs or not, rather than never having those songs to hear. And as I said earlier, when people start to close themselves off to new music, new bands, new experiences, is when you start to die, really. I think, in terms of your spirit, is that you start to go, right, everything good's been done, I'm never going to look forward. I've always been forward thinking around this. I've always been interested in new material, and so that remains. Now, this album, as I said, came out in 1998 on the heels of what is regarded to have been a creative and commercial failure, which was the Pop album. And the Pop album sold 12 million copies, 8 million copies. I think a lot of bands would be very satisfied with the failure of 8 million copies. And obviously, in terms of ticket sales on the tour, a lot of the shows were undersubscribed. They were playing to 20,000 people in Miami as opposed to 70,000 people. And I think this album was the first sign, really, of almost a creative and commercial crisis of confidence, up to the point of Pop. Everything that the band had done had been an upward trajectory. With Pop, it started to wobble a little bit. The bands were going into the studios or stadiums, and you can't get much bigger than playing a stadium, but they weren't selling out the stadiums. So, for example, 4 nights at Wembley Stadium in 1993 became two nights at Wembley Stadium in 1997. And the band, I think, felt that they had to remind people who they used to be. So this was a fairly, I think, what's the word I'm thinking of here? It was a fairly astute move. It was slightly cynical, in so much as putting out an album that covered the decade that you forgot, as a kind of way of going, well, you remember that Pop album that we did that you didn't really like, that went all a bit weird and a bit hoo-ha? Hey guys, we're still the same band. We're still U2. Look, here's the Boy from the Boy album. Here's the helmet from the from some of the sleeve artwork. We're still that band, guys. Still that band. And it felt a little bit cynical. But on the other hand, the band hadn't done a greatest hits before. That was quite important, that they hadn't done a greatest hits before. So I think this had some commercial, some commercial nous about it, but also creatively, it could justify itself as a record that deserved to be released. Of course, there were a lot of options that the band had around what they were going to release, how they were going to release it, and when they were going to release it. So, for example, you will see that the cover photo from Best Of comes from outtakes from the War album photograph sessions. And the band also went through a number of options. It says that there was no initial idea around what the final cover of War might be. So the band went back and looked at, I think, some of the other ideas that didn't quite fit the War album, and chose whether perhaps those ideas could be reused. So I'm going to move swiftly on to, I think, some of the options that the band had. So, for example, for the Best of 1890, here's some alternate sleeve designs that the band had up at the top. Love Your Early Stuff, and another compilation that's a little lower in there. And they had some options around it, but what it did do, as I said, it did feel a little cynical. It did feel a little bit opportunistic, a little bit of a case of, hey, remember me? I've had my hair cut like the way it used to be when you first fell in love with me. And it was very clearly not the best of, but actually the greatest hits. And when the band were recording Achtung Baby in 1990 and 1991, they weren't quite sure if they had the songs to make an album. So they were writing songs with the idea that they might possibly actually just put it out as new songs on a hits record. So let's go through the best of 80/90 and see what's on there. So this, by the way, is the I think the 2018 vinyl repressing. People weren't really doing or doing major production runs of vinyl in the late 90s. CD was clearly the dominant format. Vinyl was practically dead. A lot of albums by major acts weren't released on vinyl at the time, around about then. So, for example, David Bowie's Reality, no, not David Bowie's Reality, the Hours album, I don't think was released on vinyl until something like 2013. There are Depeche Mode live albums that weren't released on vinyl, and there's a number of major albums that have never been on vinyl, actually, because vinyl was dead. Not me, I kept onto my record player, but I didn't buy the vinyl edition of this at the time, primarily because I lived in a small flat, I only had so much space, and vinyl was a bit more expensive. And also, there was no such thing as a vinyl Walkman. In those days, if you wanted to be able to listen to the new album on the move, which was where I did an awful lot of my listening, I either recorded it to tape or I bought a CD Walkman. It was cheaper to buy a CD and a CD Walkman than it was to buy the vinyl album, record it onto tape and listen to it that way, because that tape cost about 50p per extra album. Maybe even, I don't know, 10 pack of C90s was 50p, sorry, £5. So each C90 was 50p, because I bought the cheap stuff, because I was on a budget. I had a big heart and a smaller wallet, is probably the best way of putting it. So what's on the best of 80/90? Well, it is the best songs, or it's the greatest hits. So they're arranged chronologically. Well, more correctly, they're not arranged chronologically. They're arranged very dramatically out of order. So it starts with Pride, it ends with October. And by the way, the 2018 issue is the first one that has October listed on the sleeve, because if you look on the original CD edition, it doesn't show October on there. The band had got to the point where they'd finished the sequencing, they'd agreed what tracks were going to be on, what sequence it was going to be in, and then suddenly they looked at it, and this was before the CDs went to manufacture, and they realised, we haven't got anything from October on there. So they put the October title track on there, but it was too late to make the original sleeve art. So I think if you check the original sleeve art for the 1998 edition of this on vinyl, it doesn't have October on the back. I am improvising wildly, but there you are. So what's on this? Well, there's Pride, New Year's Day, With or Without You, still haven't found what I'm looking for, Sunday Bloody Sunday, Bad, Where the Streets Have No Name, I Will Follow, The Unforgettable Fire, The Sweetest Thing, Desire, When Love Comes to Town, Angel of Harlem, All I Want Is You, and One Tree Hill. And all over the world, apart from one track, which is Bad, these were not these were singles, and also October wasn't a single, but it was on a compilation album. So it's very clearly a greatest hits. Now, going to go into the two vinyl discs here. That looks like that's from the war period. This I'm not quite sure. I think this is on the from around about the Unforgettable Fire period of the band. First and foremost, I think probably for me, what was a disappointment about this album was that it wasn't chronological. I have a strong bee in my bonnet about hits and singles albums. They should be presented in chronological order so that you can track the band's journey, evolution and maturity, or not, as the case might be, during the course of their career. The risk of having a chronological hits album is that it is a law of diminishing returns, which is if the band goes crap, you have all the crap songs in one place and the album gets progressively worse as it goes along. I can understand why people don't do that, but I really don't see how maybe a song from, let's say, 1988 could rub up next to a song from 1980. Those two songs, those two albums, those two periods, two writing styles, very, very different. So, for example, you've got Where the Streets Have No Name, and then you follow it with I Will Follow. Really, those should be the first two songs on the album, actually. I'm not opposed to having a non-chronological appearance by a great opening track, and I think Where the Streets Have No Name is a great opening track, and it should be the first song on this album. But then you should follow it roughly chronologically. So let's go through the track listing and see what's missing. Okay, so here's the first single, Out of Control. Nope, that's not on there. Don't know why. This is a different recording, so they could have perhaps put Out of Control on there. Let's have a look at another single, second single, Another Day. Again, not on an album. Nope, not on there. Okay. Not much fan bait for the rarities. 11 o'clock TikTok. No, that's not on there either. A Day Without Me. Nope, that's not on there either. I Will Follow's on this. What? No, that's not right. Yes, so the earliest song on the best of 1890 is their fifth single. It's a little bit weird, actually. It's a little bit revisionist. And if you were a fan that didn't have 11 o'clock TikTok on a Martin Hannett compilation, then where were you going to buy the original studio version? You are going to have to go back to the single that came out 20 years before on vinyl, which was a death and dying format. Let's have a quick look. Is Gloria on there? No. Is Fire on there? Well, debatable. It's not particularly good, but no, not on there either. Okay, so far we've got 1 out of 7. Let's try Celebration. No, that's not on there. Is this on an album? No, it isn't. So there you go. Celebration. So far we've had one song out of their first 8 singles on this best of. Not a great appearance, frankly. Not particularly honest, I think, either, actually. You've got to reflect the good and the bad. New Year's Day, yep, that's on there, all right. Okay, that's good. Maybe things will turn up a little bit. Sunday Bloody Sunday, yeah, that's on there, although it wasn't a single in the UK, but that doesn't really matter because it's going on the Hits album. Two Hearts Beat as One. No, no, not on there. Right, let's see what else we've got. Prize. Is Prize on there? Yes, it is. Well, that's not a surprise, isn't it? Although there is a 12-inch version of Pride that is longer. That wasn't on that. This is the 7-inch version of Pride, which I think is still a little cheeky. Okay, is the Unforgettable Fire on here? Well, yes, it is. It's buried in the middle. I always got the feeling that the band never particularly loved the Unforgettable Fire, which is a shame because it is a great song from a great album. Okay, let's have a look. See, what other singles are there? Well, no, Bad wasn't a single, so it's not on here, although it was the lead track on the Wide Awake in America EP, but they don't use that version. Okay, and they haven't actually put together a version of Bad that features the original, the live intro and the live ending. So you've got the, frankly, unamazing LP mix on there. We'll skip the Edge solo single because clearly that ain't U2, so that's not on there. What else is on here? With or Without You? Well, yep, With or Without You, present and correct, sir. But that's because With or Without You is from the Joshua Tree, which is one of the biggest selling albums of all time. And again, regarded by many people as the best album of the 80s, but it wasn't even the best album of that particular month because Sign of the Times was released that month. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Yep, that's on there. Let's have a look. Where the Streets Have No Name. Okay, great. This is a fantastic 7-inch single, by the way. Is that on there? Yes, but it's not the single mix of Where the Streets Have No Name. It's the album version that's been edited down to be much, much shorter. The single version has backing vocals sung by the Edge and some overdubs, which are not on the best of. Not a great thought. Is In God's Country on? No, it isn't. But that was only released in America and Canada, I think. Is One Tree Hill on it? Yes, it is. But One Tree Hill was only released in Australia and New Zealand and possibly Japan. Okay. Is Jesus Christ on there? No, but it wasn't really a single either. Is Jesus Christ on the B-sides disc? Nope. Nope. Right, Desire? Yes, that's on there. So it's all hits, baby. All hits. Angel of Harlem, When Love Comes to Town, and finally, All I Want Is You. So it's not a fully 100% representative singles album. It misses out 9-10 singles from the period which it covers. Those 9 or 10 singles haven't been on any other compilation either. So they've, like for example, a Celebration, Another Day, 11 o'clock TikTok, the single version of Out of Control. Those are only on the deluxe editions of the albums. So if you're looking for a place to buy all the U2 singles, this is not the album for you. But it did its job. And its job was to remind people that U2 were once fantastic, and in fact still are. I rate pop very, very highly. Which I'm sure I will get to bore you about at some point. But I think Pop is a fantastic record, and I think that the band disowned it very, very quickly after the end of the tour by effectively going, nah, wasn't us, mate. We're those guys with the hats. We're the guys that do the screaming sincerity. We're the guys that do the stuff about war and no more and all that stuff. And we're the guys that do a straight, simple, straightforward love song. So here's The Sweetest Thing, which is the single that was released to promote the best of. And the band decided not to, for example, use the extra space on the CD singles to give you material which was very difficult to get. So, for example, Jesus Christ wasn't on the B-sides, Baby Please Come Home wasn't on the B-sides, although there's a compilation track, Testimony, Sweet Fire of Love, they weren't on there. But we have live versions of Stories for Boys and Out of Control from Boston, and we have Twilight and a Cat Dub from Red Rocks, so kind of reminding you what the band used to be like. I wasn't particularly pleased with this album. I wasn't particularly pleased with the contents. I thought the cover was really good, by the way. The idea was pretty good. It was a nice way of getting a lot of the old B-sides on CD. So if you bought it in its first week, by the way, there was a second disc, which is the B-sides, 1980 to 1990. These were presented non-chronologically, out of order. And it was the first UK CD release for a lot of these tracks. It's also, by the way, all the B-sides from the Rattle and Hum album are on here. So you have Dancing Barefoot and Everlasting Love and Unchained Melody and Hallelujah Here She Comes and A Room at the Heartbreak Hotel. Now, as I mentioned in a previous episode, because there isn't a super fancy mega deluxe edition CD of Rattle and Hum, if you want to get the B-sides from the Rattle and Hum album, this is the only release where you can currently, or this is the only major album release where you can pick them up, unless you want to go for 32-year-old CD singles, which you probably don't. So you'll need to pick up a 22-year-old double CD that was only available in the first week. Luckily, U2 sells shed loads of records and shed loads of CDs and shed loads of VHS tapes and DVDs. So it's relatively easy to track these down. It's easier and it's cheaper to track this down than it is to track down the CD singles for Desire, Angel Harlem, When Love Comes to Town, and All I Want Is You. Now, 1990 had another thing. Here's a unofficial DVD edition of the best of 1980-1990, which was released as a VHS tape. And if you bought the VHS in the first release, you had some postcards that went with it. What I found particularly strange is that almost all of the postcards, apart from one, are of a period that is very, very poorly represented on the album. As I said, there's one single from the first two albums, and I think only one of the first 8 singles is on here. Yet the iconography clearly crawls back to Boy and War, and the postcards do as well. So the band seemed to mythologise how good they looked in 1982, but not how good they sounded, which is a thing that will come back later on, I think. But again, the best of has not been released on DVD. It's only been released on VHS, and this is an unofficial copy of the DVD. So there you have it. So that brings us to the end of the best of 1980-1990, but all was not yet lost. The band still had some fuel in the tank. They went into the studio. They started off with STS in Dublin, and they recorded a bunch of new songs, improvising in the studio as they went along. Now, the first track to be publicly available from the new recordings was Night and Day. Oh, this one's upside down. Night and Day. Here is a promotional 12-inch that wasn't officially released, or I think there's maybe about 1,000 of these that has 2 12-inch mixes of Night and Day on. It also appears on an album called Red Hot and Blue that is somewhere up there that I'm not going to got out for you. And this is the first album that really, or more correctly, the first song that really kind of let the cat out of the bag in terms of the direction that U2 were going to go into next with the Achtung Baby album. So the Night and Day track amps up the use of sequencers. It's got a darker, heavier groove. It's reminiscent a little bit of God Part 2. It's got bits of the use of big strings and keyboards and synthesizers that you also will have heard starting off probably around about the time of the Unforgettable Fire title track and Bad. But it really goes all in on those. Those become a major compositional element of the band. Is those use of those sequencers, drum machines, and so on and so forth. It's a strange release, this one, primarily as the band still looked like the U2 of 1987. So they still had the big hair, they still had the hats, they still had the look like they haven't spent a dime on clothes, as Frank Sinatra says it, but they sounded very different. They sounded a little sharper, a little wiser, a little more adept, and a little more at ease with use of technology, because there comes a point where if you don't use technology, you're actually an old man yelling at clouds. And so this is the steel string remix on the A side of this, by the way, is one of the best 12-inch mixes of all time. It's a genuine extended version that amplifies the song's drama and mystery and turns it into its full potential, as opposed to what feels like perhaps the truncated 7-inch version, or the truncated band version, which is on the Red Hot and Blue compilation. And that brought us to the end of 1990, apart from the fact that the band had played 4 shows and they'd released 1 song. And of course, this best of 1980 to 1990 was still many years away from being released. So nobody really knew what was happening, and I don't think the band really knew what was happening either. But the first kind of inklings of what was going to happen came out in the summer of 1991. And in the summer of 1991 came the release of these 2 LPs with four discs of material on, that features early recordings and demo versions of tracks that later appeared on Achtung Baby. There's some repetition, by the way, between this one and that one. None of the tracks are titled. None of the mixes are finished. This is really mix and desk quality recordings of the band performing live in the studio, writing new songs with the tape running. Bono improvising lyrics, often terrible ones, over loosely structured songs, whilst the band tried to explore their new sound and to find what direction they were going to take for the future. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know what they were going to sound like. And it's fascinating to hear. By the way, these are readily available on YouTube if you want to have a look for them. It's fascinating to hear the band work through where they think they were going to go next. So, for example, these releases have, for titles, have a look at the forthcoming album. Date of release will be expected in autumn of 91. So, even though it says all rights of the producer and owner of the recorded work are reserved, that didn't stop them here, did it? So this is the black and silver version of it, which features demo versions of Salome, Where Did It All Go Wrong, Heaven and Hell, Doctor Doctor, Jitterbug Baby, Get Together, which turned into Salome, Sunset in Colours, Take You Down, I Feel Free, an early version of Who's Gonna Ride Your Wild Horses as well. So, as a sonic thing, what it shows you is that there's an awful lot of work that goes into any U2 song. It probably would have been a frustrating experience to hear these and go, I can hear greatness here, but it's not yet been born. These are like, the baby picture that gets put on Facebook of an X-ray, an ultrasound of, a little baby there going like that, as opposed to the actual genuine thing, the baby itself. Achtung Baby! And here's the gold version, which has, again, 2 discs in. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, these discs are numbered, so silver is 1, 2, 3 and 4. These discs are labelled 5, 6, 7 and 8, so clearly it's meant to be a quadruple album set, and you're meant to have the complete version of it. And the versions on here include Take Today, Even Better Than the Real Thing, Blow Your House Down, Back Mask, Wake Up Dead Man, a track called Going Down South that later turns into North and South of the River, Someone, an early version of Acrobat, Salome, Who's Gonna Ride Your Wild Horses, an early version of The Fly and Lady with the Spinning Head and Ultraviolet, and finally a track called Chances Away. Now all these song titles are guesses by fans. on the basis of whatever lyrics that Bono is coming up with. Nobody really knows for sure exactly what these tracks are called until they were released, or some of them were released in an updated form on the Achtung Baby Mega Super Delicious box set in 2011. If you were quick off the mark in 1991, you could also get this, which is Salome, which is a 3 CD set that features all of the recordings that are featured on those 4 vinyl LPs down there. There was a box set of the 4 vinyl LPs that had an extra LP in it of even more new and unreleased material. All of those 5 LPs of material are released on this, which is Salome, which is an unofficial bootleg CD of the recordings, which features, I think, 36 songs or 36 demos by the band. Mostly fascinating listening. By the time you get to the 12th version of Salome that runs for 13 minutes, also extremely boring. And if you wanted to know what Achtung Baby was going to sound like before it came out, this is what you had to listen to. You didn't really have much in the way of a choice. I, on the other hand, just read about them. I didn't hear them. I didn't know what they sounded like. My first introduction to what the sound of the band actually was, where the band were going, what direction they were going to take in 1991 was Achtung Baby, the album, which is going to be another episode which I'm going to talk about shortly. Now, bearing in mind I've only talked for 30 minutes about a best of and so a couple of bootleg LPs, Achtung Baby is, in my opinion, probably the second best U2 album, and there's an awful lot to talk about with this record, and I will give it a separate and dedicated episode in a moment to talk about it. There was originally a compilation album called or soundtrack album called Until the End of the World, which was a soundtrack to a Wim Wenders movie, which is not particularly good, which has at least 2 songs called Until the End of the World, one by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, the other one by U2. But since Until the End of the World appears on Achtung Baby, the release of the soundtrack CD was delayed by a week, so nobody would buy this and get a sneak preview of the U2 album. U2 very, very clearly wanted you to experience Achtung Baby as a complete album and a statement on its own. So I'm going to stop here. Relatively short episode by some standards. I'm going to talk about Achtung Baby in the next episode, which I may do in a few minutes, and I may do another day. But thank you for that. You will notice that I've switched moderation on the comments, just so that if any of you want to say stupid things, I can delete them before anybody else sees them. And hopefully we'll all be lovely and nice. And just remember what Paddington said, that if we are kind and nice to each other, then the world will be right. And as Frank Turner said, in a world that feels like it's losing its mind, be more kind, my friends, be more kind. And so that is where I think I'm going to end for today. The next episode, obviously, is going to be a discussion about Achtung Baby and the album that comes with it. And I may actually give the subsequent tour a separate episode, because there's an awful lot to chew through in that album and that tour. It's one heck of a meal, and I don't think we should rush it. So I'm going to wrap up 3rd of January. Questions, comments, put them in the comments bar, and hopefully I will see you again soon. Live long and prosper.